The pen touched the final page for only a few seconds, but the decision carried the force of a palace door being permanently sealed. King Charles had not merely reduced Meghan's royal standing or suspended an honorary privilege. He had signed a formal decree ordering every remaining reference to her royal patronage removed from official monarchy records, turning years of public service into an institutional absence that could no longer be ignored. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles remained alone after the final briefing, staring at Meghan's name as though the ink carried every broken promise. The Royal Patronage Records Decree, a formal order controlling how royal appointments appear across palace records, instructed departments, archives, official websites, ceremonial registers, charity listings, and future publications to remove her identity wherever she was named as a royal patron. This went beyond ending an active role. Her old appointments had already become uncertain after she stepped away from official duties, yet the historical records still proved that she had once represented the crown. Now the king was reaching backward. The silence grew heavier. Charles read the final line again, paused over the signature, and placed the pen beside the folder. The monarch looked exhausted, not victorious, because he understood that the decree did more than close an office. It admitted that reconciliation with his daughter-in-law had truly failed. A senior courtier nearby noticed one phrase buried in the document: retrospective institutional correction. The wording meant Meghan's former patronages would no longer be treated as dormant honors. They would be classified as appointments the monarchy no longer accepted as part of its permanent public identity. Across the ocean, Meghan opened a secure message and read it twice. Her jaw tightened. She had expected distance, not an order capable of changing how future generations would ever encounter her royal chapter. She understood immediately that the palace was not simply removing authority, it was deciding which version of her service deserved to survive. Then another detail surfaced: a sealed annex. A confidential attachment listing organizations and deadlines gave one charity only 72 hours to erase the royal reference. The speed suggested resistance had already been anticipated. Charles watched the folder leave his desk, then stopped the courtier with one final question. Has Harry been informed? No one answered at once, because before the palace could erase Meghan from its records, the people bound to her by marriage, loyalty, rivalry, and blood would have to decide whether they were witnessing justice, punishment, or the final destruction of a family. Behind the official language were four people carrying four entirely different versions of the same history. Charles saw a monarchy repeatedly challenged from outside its walls. Meghan saw a woman whose contributions were being deliberately deleted. Harry saw another attack on the life he had chosen to defend. William saw a crisis that had consumed years of trust. The decree united them only in one brutal truth: none of them could escape its emotional cost. Charles understood exactly what he was risking. As monarch, he believed official records had to reflect loyalty to the institution, because every royal patronage connected a person's name directly to the authority of the crown. Yet as Harry's father, he knew this order could destroy whatever private bond remained between them. The king had protected the monarchy, but the victory felt hollow when the cost might be his own son. Meghan stared at the secure message still open before her. Her former patronages had represented more than titles. They were tied to women's causes, education, community projects, and the belief that she could reshape royal service from within. Harry entered quietly and saw the words on the screen. She did not speak at first. When she finally asked whether his father had truly approved it, he looked away before answering. That single movement told her how deeply the decision had wounded him too. William received his copy inside a private red folder, the kind used to carry confidential royal papers between senior members of the family. He closed it after the first page and moved toward the window. Catherine watched him carefully as he admitted the order might be necessary, but the world would see vengeance. The prince was not celebrating Meghan's removal. He was mourning the years of trust that had collapsed around everyone involved. She understood that he feared leaving the same unresolved battle for his future reign. Camilla learned another troubling detail during a private conversation with Charles. He had not warned Harry before signing. The Queen Consort cautioned that surprise could harden his anger into permanent opposition, but the king replied that advance notice would only have triggered another public confrontation. She heard the certainty in his voice, yet she also recognized the pain beneath it. Meghan soon noticed something even more disturbing. The decree did not remove Harry's former patronages from the historical record. The difference felt deliberate. She began to suspect that Charles was separating husband from wife, preserving his son's wounded royal identity while isolating hers completely. Harry refused to accept that distinction without answers. He instructed his legal advisor to locate every discussion, memorandum, and recorded consultation that had preceded the order. What returned was not merely a timeline of palace frustration, it was the name of one ceremony where a private exchange had turned years of tension into a direct challenge to the crown. Every royal rupture has a moment that appears ordinary until history gives it a darker meaning. In this story, that moment came during the Commonwealth renewal ceremony at St. James's Palace, months before Charles signed the decree. The cameras captured formal smiles, measured applause, and carefully arranged unity. What they did not capture was a private conversation behind a closed reception room door. The Exchange Palace officials later described as the exact point of no return. Meghan had arrived knowing the ceremony carried more weight than its calm appearance suggested. The Commonwealth renewal ceremony was a fictional palace gathering where former and current royal patronage holders were asked to approve new rules governing charities connected to the crown. Those rules required centralized palace communications and strict political neutrality, meaning every public message had to remain under royal control. She had also been asked to sign a historical acknowledgement, confirming that her former patronages now belonged completely to the monarchy's institutional framework. The wording changed everything. Meghan believed the document allowed the palace to claim full ownership over work she had helped shape through speeches, visits, campaigns, and personal relationships. When the formal gathering ended, she requested a private conversation with Charles. He agreed, believing the matter could still be settled quietly. Meghan placed the unsigned acknowledgement on the table between them. She told the king that the palace could not demand her silence while continuing to use her name whenever it strengthened royal history. Charles remained controlled, but his body stiffened. He closed the folder and answered that no individual could be greater than the crown they had once represented. She pushed back, insisting that her patronage legacy belonged partly to her because she had carried the pressure, criticism, and emotional cost attached to it. Then Meghan revealed the detail that transformed disagreement into threat. Through a documented proposal already prepared by her team, she intended to publish an independent digital archive containing her speeches, charity visits, and patronage achievements. Charles immediately understood the danger. Two versions of royal history could soon exist, one controlled by the palace and another shaped by the woman it no longer trusted. William stood outside the reception room and heard the final raised words without knowing the entire exchange. When Charles emerged, the prince saw that his father's expression had changed. The king quietly instructed his private secretary to examine whether inactive royal patronages could be removed retrospectively from official records. Charles initially treated that review as protection, not punishment. But days later, Harry sent a furious private message accusing the palace of trying to own Meghan's past. The accusation ended whatever hesitation remained. That confrontation would not happen through aides, lawyers, or carefully softened statements, because Charles had reached the moment when only a face-to-face reckoning could determine whether the decree would be abandoned or signed. There were no cameras, no communications advisors, and no rows of courtiers to absorb the tension. Charles and Harry entered the private library as father and son, but the document waiting between them ensured they would speak as monarch and exile. For several minutes, neither man sat down. The silence became its own accusation, carrying every interview, every public wound, and every unanswered message into a room too small to contain them. Charles had requested the meeting after the historical record review was completed. The review was a formal examination of how Meghan's former royal patronages appeared across palace records and whether those references could remain unchanged. Harry had traveled privately to Britain, believing he could still persuade his father to preserve her history, even if she never returned to official duties. The king placed the draft decree between them and explained that the monarchy could not maintain permanent honors for someone who rejected its authority while building a separate version of those same honors. Harry refused the chair offered to him. He told Charles that removing Meghan's name would not protect the crown. It would prove that the institution destroyed anyone who refused to submit. The king gripped the back of the chair but kept his voice low. He answered that she had been welcomed, funded, protected, and trusted with royal patronages, only to turn the monarchy itself into an adversary. Harry stepped closer. He insisted that Meghan had spoken publicly because no one listened while she remained inside. Charles did not interrupt, but the accusation struck harder than anger. The monarch had spent years believing restraint would preserve the family. His son now treated that restraint as abandonment. Then Charles revealed the compromise he had once considered. Through a documented council proposal, he had been prepared to preserve Meghan's entries under a neutral historical designation, meaning the records would acknowledge her past service without suggesting continuing royal authority. Her planned independent archive changed everything. Palace advisors warned that two competing versions of royal history could emerge, each claiming the right to define what her patronages meant. Harry gave his father one final choice: withdraw the decree, or accept that he might never bring his children into a royal residence again. Charles closed his eyes briefly, then turned the unsigned document toward himself. The threat wounded the father, but it did not move the monarch. Charles refused to sign in front of him. Instead, he said the Crown Council would decide the matter the following morning. The Crown Council was the senior group advising the sovereign on major institutional decisions. Harry left without another word, unaware that William had already been asked to support the decree before the meeting began. Once the library door closed behind Harry, the conflict moved beyond the pain between father and son and into the machinery of royal power, where private sympathy could be silenced by constitutional duty. A royal decree may carry one signature, but decisions of this magnitude are rarely created by one hand alone. Before Charles could act, legal advisors, archive officials, senior courtiers, and the heir to the throne had to confront a dangerous question. Could Meghan's name remain inside official history without continuing to challenge the monarchy's authority? The answer emerged not through shouting, but through one quiet meeting where William's support changed everything. William stood beside Catherine outside the council chamber, knowing the next few minutes could deepen the break with Harry beyond repair. The Crown Council, the senior group that advises the sovereign on major institutional decisions, would examine the decree's legal, charitable, archival, and reputational consequences before Charles signed it. The prince understood why that mattered. If the issue remained unresolved, his future reign could inherit rival claims over who owned Meghan's royal service and who had the right to define its meaning. Catherine watched him struggle. He admitted that supporting the decree would make his brother see him as an enemy, perhaps permanently. She touched his arm and told him that refusing to decide was also a decision. Delay might feel merciful, but it could prolong the damage until the conflict became even harder to contain. William heard the warning, yet the pain in his face showed that duty had not made the choice easier. Charles opened the meeting by asking the question no advisor expected. Did the decree truly protect the monarchy, or did it merely satisfy its anger? The king turned directly to his elder son. William paused before replying that the crown could not erase pain, but it had to define who officially spoke in its name. His answer gave the monarch what private certainty could not: support from the man who would inherit the consequences. The keeper of the royal archives then delivered a documented assessment. The office was responsible for protecting the monarchy's official historical records, and its report showed Meghan's patronage title across hundreds of digital and printed entries. Removal would require revised catalogs, rewritten charity histories, replacement plaques, and restricted notes explaining why the alterations had occurred. Anne supported the order, but refused to allow complete destruction of the record. She insisted that sealed historical documents preserve every original entry for future scholars. Her demand created the final compromise. Public references would disappear, while the private archive would retain the full truth. Charles accepted the condition. With William's support and Anne's safeguard, the king now possessed both authority and moral cover to sign. Yet the moment the first organization received its removal order, the human cost became impossible to hide. The decree had been built in silence, but its consequences would arrive loudly, through altered websites, cancelled ceremonies, frightened charities, and Meghan's first realization that the palace had already begun deleting her name. At precisely 9 o'clock, the first page changed. Meghan's photograph remained for several seconds, while the patronage title beneath it disappeared, leaving an empty space before the entire profile refreshed. In palace offices, staff worked through prepared lists. In charity headquarters, directors opened formal notices carrying the king's authority. And thousands of miles away, Meghan watched evidence of her royal life vanish one line at a time. The removal moved quickly. Official biographies, patronage registers, annual reports, royal engagement databases, charity affiliations, ceremonial programs, and public archive indexes were updated through one coordinated palace plan. A patronage register was the formal record showing which royal represented each organization, making every deletion an official separation from the crown. Charities could mention Meghan only as a past personal supporter where necessary. They could no longer use royal styling or language suggesting that the monarchy still endorsed her connection. Meghan opened the website of a women's organization she had once championed. Her patron designation had been replaced by one cold sentence describing a former association. She shut the laptop and walked away, but returned moments later. The need to know became stronger than the pain of looking. Another page had changed, then another. Each altered line made the decree feel less like distant palace paperwork and more like a judgment unfolding in real time. Harry watched her move between anger and humiliation. He urged Meghan to issue an immediate public statement before the palace controlled the entire story. She refused. The Duchess told him she would not respond while wounded, because any emotional phrase could be presented as fresh evidence that Charles had been right to remove her. Harry understood the strategy, yet he could see how much silence was costing her. Resistance appeared inside one affected charity. During a documented telephone exchange with palace officials, its director argued that Meghan's involvement had increased donations, attention, and trust among women who rarely felt heard. The answer arrived without warmth. Refusal to alter the records would end the organization's access to future royal support. The director complied, but the warning exposed the full force behind the decree. A longtime employee in a London office removed a framed certificate bearing Meghan's patronage title. She paused, before placing it inside a storage box, remembering the day the former royal had spoken privately with staff and stayed beyond the scheduled time. The plaque could be hidden, the gratitude could not. Then Meghan's phone rang that evening. The caller was not a lawyer, journalist, or supporter. Catherine asked to speak privately, without aides, recordings, or prepared statements. As official doors closed around Meghan's royal past, one private conversation offered the first chance for someone inside the family to acknowledge the pain without defending the decree or attacking the woman it had erased. The call lasted less than 20 minutes, yet it changed the emotional direction of the entire crisis. There were no secretaries listening, no palace statement waiting for approval, and no demand that either woman apologize. Catherine spoke first, not as a future queen defending the institution, but as someone who understood what it meant to have private pain turned into public symbolism. Meghan listened cautiously, expecting strategy, and hearing something far more difficult to dismiss. Catherine made her position clear. She was not calling on Charles's behalf, and she had no authority to reverse the decree. Her only purpose was to stop one institutional decision from becoming proof that every personal bond inside the family had died with it. The future queen understood that the order controlled official records, but she also knew those records could not fully explain what had happened between real people. Meghan answered carefully. She said the decree had erased work she performed sincerely, no matter what later happened between her and the palace. Those patronages had connected her to women, families, and communities who believed she had stood beside them. Catherine acknowledged that websites and registers could be changed, but the people helped by that work would still remember who had shown up when it mattered. Meghan's guarded tone finally broke. She admitted that the removal made her feel as though the monarchy wanted to prove she had never belonged at all. Catherine fell silent for several seconds. Then she said that belonging and surviving were not always the same thing inside royal life. The words did not repair the damage, but they reached the wound beneath Meghan's anger. Catherine then disclosed, through the private conversation itself, why William had supported the decree. The prince feared leaving the crisis unresolved for another reign, forcing his future monarchy to inherit the same battle over history and authority. Meghan did not forgive him, but she understood for the first time that his choice came from fear of inherited chaos, not simply hatred. Then Catherine revealed something Meghan had not been told. Anne had insisted that the unaltered private archive remain intact. The archive was the sealed historical collection preserving original speeches, visits, letters, and records for future study. Meghan's public patronage titles would disappear, but her actual work would not be destroyed. Meghan made her decision before the call ended. She would not launch a competing royal archive. Instead, she would create a personal charitable record without royal branding, allowing the work to stand on its own. The women ended the call without reconciliation, yet with something neither institution nor decree could manufacture: recognition. And that fragile shift would soon be tested before the entire world. By sunrise, the decree was no longer a sealed palace decision. It belonged to broadcasters, newspaper editors, royal supporters, Sussex defenders, charity workers, and crowds gathering beneath cold morning skies. Some called it overdue accountability. Others called it calculated humiliation. Yet one image dominated the day. A newspaper held against the gates of Buckingham Palace, its front page showing Meghan's portrait beside two stark words: erased forever. Britain divided almost instantly. Traditionalist newspapers praised Charles for defending the integrity of royal service, arguing that anyone who no longer represented the crown could not continue occupying its official history without limits. Sympathetic commentators answered that patronage records documented real work, not merely family loyalty. Palace communications, the official statements used to explain royal decisions to the public, insisted that the decree concerned representation, not the value of Meghan's past charitable efforts. The distinction sounded careful, but few believed the order was purely administrative. Outside Buckingham Palace, tension gathered around one woman holding the erased forever front page above the crowd. A supporter nearby applauded the king's firmness and said the monarchy had finally drawn a necessary boundary. Another person stepped forward, placed flowers beside the gates, and left a handwritten note reading, "Service still happened." The two gestures captured the national conflict more powerfully than any palace statement could. A former employee from one affected charity then appeared during a live morning broadcast. Through that televised interview, she described how Meghan had once sat with vulnerable women and encouraged them to speak without shame. Her voice trembled as she said a website could be rewritten, but those women could not be ordered to forget what they had felt. The Duchess appeared twice in the employee's account, not as a royal title, but as the person who had listened when others had not. The broadcaster then revealed that Meghan had declined to challenge the decree in court and would not issue an angry public response. Her restraint unsettled commentators who had prepared for open warfare. It also denied the palace the confrontation its advisors expected to manage. Silence, this time, became its own form of control. Charles watched the coverage privately. When the charity employee began speaking, he lowered the volume, but did not turn off the screen. The king was forced to confront the truth beneath the argument. Institutional necessity and human gratitude could exist at the same time. That evening, Charles requested the final implementation report and ordered one last amendment. The instruction would determine how Meghan's service appeared inside the sealed historical record. The public battle had exposed every contradiction inside the decree, but Charles's final amendment would decide whether the monarchy's verdict became total condemnation or a harder, more honest separation between service, loyalty, and belonging. When the final report returned to the king, Meghan's royal patronage had disappeared from every active official record. The websites were changed, the registers amended, and the palace language standardized. Charles could have allowed the story to end as an act of complete erasure. Instead, he opened the sealed historical directive and added one final sentence. Words that neither restored Meghan's position nor denied the work she had once performed. Charles confirmed that the decree would remain permanent. Meghan would hold no royal patronage, and no future palace publication would describe her as an official representative of the crown. The sealed historical directive, a confidential instruction explaining how original records must be preserved, would keep the complete account hidden from public listings, but available inside the royal archive. It would state that she served during a defined period, completed engagements under the monarchy, and later ceased representing it after trust collapsed beyond repair. The king took up his pen and wrote the final archival sentence himself. Service rendered in the name of the crown remains part of its history, even when the bond of service does not endure. Charles read the words once. He signed beneath them and closed the file. There was no satisfaction in the gesture. The monarch had protected royal authority, but he had also accepted that authority could not restore the family it had failed to hold together. Meghan received confirmation through a private message from her legal advisor. Her official royal identity was gone, and she felt no victory. Yet the sealed archive would preserve her speeches, visits, correspondence, and completed work. The fear that every contribution would be denied finally loosened its grip. She had lost the title attached to her service, but not the human meaning of what she had done. Harry understood that his father had drawn a boundary, not offered reconciliation. He remained furious over the public removal, but he abandoned his threat to keep his children away from every royal residence. The prince recognized that permanent estrangement would repeat the same act of erasure within another generation, turning pain into an inheritance his children had never chosen. William accepted his own consequence. By supporting the decree, he had given the monarchy clarity, while destroying any illusion that the Sussex rupture could be quietly repaired. Catherine's private call remained the only surviving bridge, too fragile to restore trust, but strong enough to prevent complete emotional destruction. There was no further appeal, no hidden reversal, and no unfinished battle waiting beyond the final page. The crown kept control of its name, Meghan kept ownership of her life beyond it, and the monarchy closed one of its most painful chapters with clarity rather than peace. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.